Thank you very much. I am very honored to be here, and I've been so delighted over the years to have been invited several times to Christendom. This time, I nearly upset the whole apple cart here. They asked me last October to come, and I said yes, and then I forgot about it completely, and I made reservations to go to the Azores this weekend. I didn't notice the conflict until 2 weeks ago, and I wrote a note and I said, you know, I'm just so sorry, I can't believe I did that, and we worked it out that I could speak here, which I'm very sorry for all the distress and anxiety I caused everybody on that. So just want to, you know, part of a commencement address is to give advice. So my first piece of advice is don't double book. Right? It causes a lot of problems. I'm also glad I think the Holy Spirit might have got me here tonight instead of tomorrow, because Father Spitzer is just unbelievably awesome. And usually when I go to conferences, I like to speak after the star speaker, because I figure people already got their money's worth. They won't care much about what I have to offer. But so it's nice to get this here, and then tomorrow you can get the real stuff. As I was contemplating about what to do for this talk, again, I'm a good Aristotelian, and these students know what that is, and that means you always start with the end in sight. What's the purpose of a commencement speech? And first of all, it's to congratulate the graduates, the faculty, the parents, and all who made it possible for the students to receive such an education in such a spectacular place. And as you get older, you realize how many people have involved in that in so many different ways, and how grateful we all have to be, and grateful for the product of this great institution. I suppose another end or telos of an Aristotelian commencement speech is to try to orient you to the future that you face, and give you some kind of charge about entering this new phase of your life. A lot of commencement speeches draw a lot upon cliches. And I'm starting to love cliches as I get older. I don't remember what I'm going to say usually, and if I can throw in a cliche, at least I can keep talking. It's not such a bad thing. I mean, cliches are cliches because they capture some fairly standard truth. And at commencements, you might hear such advice as be true to yourself, or follow your dreams, or challenge authority. Commencement speeches at more serious institutions sometimes have a little Chicken Little about them. The sky is falling, the sky is falling. That's what you're going to hear tonight, right? The sky is falling. We'll talk about that a bit. It's typical, I think, for each generation to think the times in which it is are particularly challenging, and I suppose there's a more than a little truth to that perspective. But to some extent, I think it's true to say that the job of each generation is to build upon the accomplishments of the previous generation, and then to try to clean up the mess left behind by the previous generation. I hope in your education, I'm absolutely certain at Christendom, you've had the occasion to read Plato's Republic. And one of the first characters is the old man Cephalus, and he's preparing for death. And he's notable for having stated that his modest goal in life was wanting not to decrease the patrimony he had inherited from his father, and if he could, to add to it. And that's a pretty good goal when you think about it. You at least want to add to what you've not decrease what you've received and add to it. And that's not a bad goal, especially if the patrimony refers not just to the financial status he inherited, but to the principles and values he received from his predecessors. And for decades, I felt the need to apologize to younger generations for the mess that my generation has created for them. My generation was the generation of the sexual revolution, and it certainly produced a mess. The revolution was the result of bad philosophy advanced by previous generations, but it hit home in a way that was peculiarly devastating. In his letter, Pope Benedict recently, his letter on the crisis, mentioned that it was the sexual disarray of the 60s that has led to the crisis that we're in the church today. John Paul II spoke about the bad philosophy and the bad views that have led to the culture of death that he talks about in his encyclical Evangelium Vitae. Sorry, every encyclical for me is Humanae Vitae, but his encyclical is Evangelium Vitae, and there he speaks against previous attacks on life that were basically tribe against tribe and nation against nation, or even brother against brother, as in Cain and Abel. But the current attacks against life, he noted, such as abortion and euthanasia, is mother and father against child, and daughters and sons against aging parents. That attack has entered into the very heart of the family. We kill those whom we most naturally love, because in some way we see them not as immeasurably enhancing our lives, and thus worth whatever sacrifice is required, but we see them as impeding our pursuit of pleasure, which we mistake as being the same thing as happiness. And it gives me great joy that I know a Christendom graduate cannot make that mistake, to think that pleasure and happiness are the same thing. I'm most known for my work on Humanae Vitae, and I've often spoken of the bad consequences predicted by Pope Paul VI. His was a prophetic voice, but even he did not see all the horrors which would follow. Certainly, it's not hard to see how the approval of sex that rejects the procreative power of the sexual act leads to the acceptance of homosexuality. But who thought Americans would ever accept same-sex marriages? 20 years ago, it was unthinkable. All the polls said absolutely not. And it was all overnight, almost overnight, that it changed. And that we would accept the creation of babies from purchased eggs and sperm, so that same-sex couples could imitate heterosexuals who can have babies, but don't. There's something wrong with this. Homosexuals want to have babies and families, and heterosexuals don't. There's something, the rebellion against nature is more or less complete. I don't know of anyone who predicted the emergence of transgenderism to the point where a whole school curriculum for children is designed to promote acceptance of transgenderism. Nobody would have predicted that even 5 years ago. Most people have never heard of it. Most people believe they've never met such a person. And so it's just, what universe are we now living in? The times in which the current generation live in are odd indeed, and not to say honestly terrifying. Those who believe that life begins at conception, that males can only marry females, and it's not possible to select our own sex, are hardly being allowed to express our views and will likely soon be more harshly persecuted for them. Not within memory has the persecution of Christians worldwide been worse. And again, my confidence in being here, I often tell people, I sound very pessimistic, oddly enough. And I say, I don't know that it's possible for a person who teaches in the seminary in Detroit to be pessimistic. We're getting the most incredible young men. And it's not possible for someone who gets an honorary degree from Christendom to be pessimistic. I know that these are the young people who are equipped to fight the battles of these days. It's not just one opinion against another opinion. It's one opinion, very wobbly, if at all supported, against a very well justified, thought through argument that you can make. You're not relying just upon your opinions. You're relying upon what you've learned can be justified, that you can offer arguments for. I think one of the saddest things about the modern age is how little people like debate. When I was in college, and being in a graduation like this kind of makes you think a bit about your own graduation, if you can remember that far ago. Again, I went to Grinnell College in Iowa, which is the absolute 180-degree antithesis of Christendom. Right now they have a married same-sex couple who is the president of the university who have adopted 2 boys. I don't think they'd let me step on campus at this point. We did love debate, even though we were very much relativists at the time. But we still loved to hear debates. And we actually could be persuaded by debates. And now I find that young people, I'm sure it's not true here, because I'm sure you love debates, because you love to hear the arguments on both sides and see which arguments win. But I have found many young people don't like debates at all. And I think it's partly because of divorce, right? Because there's so much conflict at home. They don't want it anywhere else. And mom and dad fight, and mom and dad disagree, and now they don't live with each other. And I just don't want to hear any more debates. And I don't want to say that my mom's right or my dad's right. I just want everybody to get along, right? And I think it's a major problem. And one thing, I think one of the reasons that Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and others have become so popular is because they are reinvigorating the life of the mind and showing people that there are reasons for things. It's not just my opinion versus your opinion, but there's reasons. And they do so with a very manly and fatherly voice. And that's what our culture is missing, a manly, fatherly voice who can make the arguments, right? It's not that we women aren't important. I'm here because somebody thinks I'm important. I'm happy to do what I'm doing. But I think there's a particular lack in our culture of the adult male who's willing to act as a father to other males and guide them correctly. And that's very much what is needed. I have confidence, again, that Christendom is going to be a source of such individuals and of women who can do the same. And it's a marvelous service that you provide to other people, especially if you can remain calm, right? When I left college, I suddenly found the truth. I had an undergraduate professor who was fantastic in arguing. He had basically a Socratic approach to things. We would have students we would be studying the Medea. And Medea was one, I'm sure I hope you've all read Medea, but she cut up her children and boiled them in water and in oil and fed them to her husband Jason because she was mad at him. And this professor would ask us, were the gods right to be mad at Medea? And we would say, I don't know why they would say, I don't know why she was. There's no such thing as right or wrong. There's no way knowing what is right or wrong. Of course, he practically had to be quiet for about 20 minutes. He couldn't believe we'd say that. But these students were saying, well, you can't know right from wrong. And he said, let me just try something. He said, are there or are there not 40 pink elephants in this room? And these students would say, I don't know. One man, I don't know. Now, I'm 19 and I'm sitting there and saying, I know, I swear there's not 40 pink elephants. I'll go to my death over this. But I'm sitting there watching him and I'm saying, how can someone sit there and say he doesn't know whether there's 40 pink elephants in the room? And the professor would say, well, what about you? He said, do you know whether or not you exist? And he would say, no, I don't. I don't know whether or not I exist. Then he would do the old Cartesian thing, which I'm sure all you students know, that he says, can a non-existing thing even question his existence? And the student would say, I don't know. And then the professor would say, well, then I need to stop talking to you because I would have to doubt my own sanity if I talk to a non-existing thing. So I can only talk to existing things. Well, this professor was really responsible for an amazing number of conversions to Catholicism because we followed it out. We followed it out. If there's true and false, and there's right and wrong, and there's justice, well, what institution in the world stands for that? And it was Catholicism. It was a remarkable thing. And when I looked at these young men, I'd say, I know why they don't want to admit there's not 40 pink elephants in this room, because they're sleeping with their girlfriend. And they know that if there's right and wrong, true and false, well, then they have to look at their own actions. And if they look at their own actions, they're going to figure out what the truth is about that. And a number of these young men did convert and become Catholics and figured it out. So much of it is our Catholic Church that is the answer to virtually everything. But of course, we're living in a time when the Catholic Church is in a very great crisis. Right? Many of us, maybe most of you, maybe all of you, accept the fundamental premise that the Catholic Church has the answers and the reasons and the vision that should help us fight the battles of any age. And that's a fundamental conviction of the Church itself. But the Church has been quite wobbly, especially since Vatican II. Not necessarily because of Vatican II, but because of the dissent and false and damaging theologies that emerged after Vatican II, beginning with the dissent from Humanae Vitae. And Benedict in his letter says the same thing. If you haven't read Benedict's letter, I highly recommend it. It's one of the remarkable, Vigano's letter is a historical document, right? There's been very few things like that ever that a top churchman criticized the church. And then we have such a thing as an emeritus pope. Whoa, that's totally unprecedented. We have an emeritus pope. An emeritus pope wrote a letter about the sex abuse crisis. And he read it because he's worried about us, right? He's worried about us. He's worried that we'll lose our faith, right? And he wrote this letter to tell us not to lose our faith. But he gained our trust by acknowledging that there is a crisis. He didn't say, oh, no, don't worry, there's nothing, it'll all be past, it'll all be gone. He said, no, there's a crisis. He gave several reasons for it. Again, one, the sexual revolution, another one, bad theology. And that's a hard thing, because I thought that great progress had been made in writing the direction of the bark of Peter. Veritatis Splendor and the Catechism made the job of faithful theologians much easier, and to some extent took the wind out of the sails of the dissenters. When those documents were published, those of us who had been fighting for orthodoxy were just thrilled, because now we could say, here's the Catechism, here's Veritatis Splendor, this is what the church teaches. And people that couldn't have gotten a job in any Catholic institution were now being hired. It's an amazing thing that there was, up until about the year 2000, there wasn't a seminary in the United States that would have hired me or any of my colleagues that are now teaching at Sacred Heart Major Seminary. And things changed. And I thought, oh my gosh, things changed. I didn't know that I'd live long enough to see them change. And I was becoming positively optimistic about reform in the church. And then along came McCarrick, right? And I was devastated, totally devastated, that this man was in our church and he'd done what he'd done, and he got advanced and more advanced and more advanced, and everybody seemed to know, and nobody wanted to tell, and nobody wants to look at the record to find out what the record really was. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's a problem here. And I had known lots of these problems. I read the stories in the 80s and the 90s about corruption in the church, and it was awful. I read the books in the early 2000s, and it was awful. And I thought, oh, I know the bishops know. Surely the bishops know. I know they know. I'm sure they're doing something about it. And along came McCarrick and said, they're not. Or at least not very many of them. There are certainly good bishops. I don't know we have one here before us, and it's a great consolation to everybody. But there are many who are not. And I don't know how many, but I know it's serious and it's broad and wide and deep. Now, I'm sorry to speak about such a dismal event, a dismal topic at a joyous event, but if those who believe the sex abuse crisis in the church is one of the worst crises ever in the church, ever, right? Not to mention it would be irresponsible. And honestly, not to mention it in a place where you can have hope about this, right? Where we can have hope that there is a future. And I'm trying to do whatever I can to do to bring about reform. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I do have an encrypted email account and a secure phone line. And I have a code name. I changed it. I was thinking about Popessa, which means a lady pope. But I decided it wasn't elevated enough, so I chose Mediatrix. Okay, I want all the help I can get, all right? So it's a curious thing that we've become aware of this corruption at the same time that the church is trying to introduce an age of new evangelization. And I'm thinking, what the heck is the Holy Spirit up to, right? Here we were all getting all geared up to go out there and do what Catholics don't do very well, which is to evangelize, right? I mean, how many of us are comfortable talking to people about Jesus? You know, I'd like you to meet Jesus. I've met Jesus. Look, I'm not that kind of person. Right? It's like, what are we going to do? And you know, how can we invite people into a church that we're kind of ashamed of and that we belong to, but some are even thinking of leaving? We even know some true believers who say they can't take it anymore. And I'm listening to all this, and I'm trying to think, and then I got an idea, and this might be the case, that the Holy Spirit is making it easier for us to evangelize in a strange way. That this topic comes up a lot, and it's actually easy to bring up. If someone says, how are you doing? You say, not so well. I've heard about another scandal, and I'm really down about it. And then people will ask you, well, why do you stay in this church? There's your opportunity, right there. Why do you stay in this church? And honestly, I was on the plane today. I got on the plane. One of the things I hate to do is talk to my neighbor on the plane. I know it's a great opportunity for evangelization and all sorts of things, but I send out these signals like, don't talk to me. Well, evidently I wasn't successful at that today, because the man next to me started talking to me. He, where are you going? I said, college and giving a commencement address. Oh, you must be quite distinguished. Well, I said, it's a little college. I'm sorry. Not to diminish the honor, but it's a little college. And then somehow at some point I said something about the sex abuse crisis, and he said, what are you doing about it? And I said, well, I'm trying to convince people there is one, and it's very serious, and then I'm trying to convince them not to leave the church and to use it as a moment for evangelization. And he looked at me and says, I've got something for you. I said, what's that? He's a Mormon. He's a very intelligent man, a doctor, endocrinologist, went off to some big conference to give a speak. Well, I had an hour introduction to Mormonism. I was thinking, you're saying, okay, here's my opportunity to try out my theory. I'm going to evangelize him. I'm going to talk to him. He said, why don't you leave? And I said, I don't leave because of the Eucharist. And that's what Pope Benedict said in his letter. He said, there's nowhere else I can find the Eucharist, nowhere else. Nobody has the Eucharist as the Catholic Church understands it. I said, there's nowhere else to go. I said, I want Jesus. And the church gives me Jesus in the Eucharist, not to mention all the other sacraments, not to mention the beauty and the history and the intellectual tradition and everything else. So the church is not the corrupt priests in its midst. It's not. And we have to make that very clear to people. It's not. But he didn't hear all that. What he heard is I needed a church like his church that is not Protestant, he kept telling me. It's they have elders who help keep order, etc. And I should want it. But I was impressed with him because he truly loved his church and he truly knew the tenets of church. And he opened his phone and showed me all these things. And we had a good talk. But I thought, well, I wouldn't say that I distinguished myself in this exchange. I mean, I didn't buckle, of course, but he said to me, he showed me the passages in the Book of Mormon that say that if you read this and you're really open to it, you will change. You will see the truth. And he said there's two things required. One is that you read it, and the other, you're open to change. And he said, I think you'll only do one of those. I said, yeah, I would read it. I'll read anything. He said, but you're not open to change. I said, you bet. I'm not. It is, I think that you young people at Christendom and the parents and the friends, you are particularly well situated to be the best evangelist that there ever was. Because when you convince people that you want to stay in a church when it's as low as it can go, I hope, at least in a certain respect, when you let people know that you're not leaving for anything. I know people who are, one of them is my sister. When she started hearing about the sex abuse crisis, she's been deepening her faith a great deal over the years. But she said, all of a sudden I realized how much I love this church. She said, I realized how mad I am at the priests who are bad. And then I realized I better go to confession. And she went to confession, and she started talking to the priest and saying, I'm just really mad. And then she named names. And then he said, but you shouldn't be so mad about it. No, this was wrong. He said, well, but you got to think, no, they were wrong. Well, what are you confessing? I'm confessing that I'm so mad at them. And he didn't yield and she didn't yield. She told me, I'm going back next week and try again. So that's what it's doing for some people, all right, for some people. And I think, the church is hurting financially in certain places it should, but that doesn't mean we should decrease our giving. We should find churches and dioceses and wherever who we think are doing the right things and give there to, again, suggest our support of different things. So there's various things that are being offered. There's called the Benedict option, the Marian option, to fortify us. The church has had many great things over the years, still does, the different lay movements, etc., that help us. But in his beautiful little letter, Benedict talks about the little household that he's living in and how he has a household of friends who bolster each other in these hard times. And I think one of the great things you've got knowledge, you've had devotions, you've learned how to love to pray, you've learned how to love spiritual reading and scripture and the Mass and beautiful music, beautiful art, beautiful places. Beauty is so important in this age, and Christendom has obviously made an amazing commitment to showing that the intellectual life, the liturgical life, and beauty are all important, as is friendship. So it's really important, and I've met a couple of you tonight who are alums of Christendom, and you're back here because your children are graduating. And how much you got out of Christendom, and now you get to see your children, and you get to meet your old friends. You meet your old friends, and you will never lose that, and that you've got to foster that here. And when you go out, don't just be the Christendom crowd. Invite other people in. Invite other people into that crowd, because they need what you were blessed to get. And so I think I've run over my time. Usually I just come to a crashing halt with my talks. But I guess if there's, as I said, there's little aphorisms that maybe you're supposed to share in commencement addresses. And the three that are holding me together, or held me together for some time. One is God's will is always better than my will. Really important to remember. God's will is always better than your will. So if you're in some fight with God about something, you want to hope that he wins, right? That's a hard thing to hold on to, but it's very important. I also love the line in the readings that says, surrender to God and he will do everything for you. I'm largely a lazy person. I love that thought. Now, it doesn't mean I shouldn't do anything, but again, especially with this sex abuse crisis, I'm spending hours on it every day, and honestly, I don't know what I'm doing. And I just have to I keep telling myself, don't think, just pray. Don't think, just pray. Because when I think, I come up with outlandish schemes. Outlandish. I'm going to solve the problem. I'm going to do this and that and that. And then they're so unrealistic, it's hilarious. Which other people sometimes tell me, but the problem is I'm Janet Smith, so some people take me seriously when I say these things. And, they just don't say, lady, go back in your room and start all over again. So I appreciate people that do that, because otherwise I get certain ways with things and then it fails and it's discouraging. And the other one is daily I read in the liturgy of the hours is today harden not your hearts. Today harden not your hearts. Listen to the voice of the Lord. And I just think it seems to me the older I get, as I said, the more I want to pray and the less I want to think. Praying is a lot more reliable than my thoughts. And just this idea of listening to God's voice, and trying to, I think that's what prayer is really so much about, is just trying to know what voice that is. What voice is God's voice? So when you're sort of praying, or then you're done and you're kind of walking around, I get an idea. I think I should do this. And now I'm learning better to know when it's one of my crackpot ideas and when it's one of God's crackpot ideas, honestly. So I want to leave you with that, is just in really delight in what you have received from here. I know that you have a deep sense of gratitude. I know that this place knows what it is and knows what it does. It's extremely special, and it has such an enormous contribution. It's a small place, small college, but it has such an amazing contribution to make to the world. And you've been privileged to be a part of it, and I'm privileged to celebrate this with you. Thank you.